Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being part of the SoCreative Digital MeetUps. This section is entitled the Human-Centered Design Talk, and my name is Mumbi Musunga. So just a brief intro about myself. I am the CTO and co-founder of Intervas, and Intervas is an ICT solutions provider, primarily in the mobile and telecommunications field. In a summary, we basically develop ICT solutions that help you and your organization communicate with your end customers. What is human-centered design? So human-centered design is being mindful of the human-centered design principles when you're faced with a problem or a challenge. Now, these human-centered design principles can be applied across various industries, and it's all about putting the people or your customers or your users at the center of the solution. Now at Intervas, we get various clientele from across the African continent, from east to west, north to south. Now, we try to incorporate a human-centered design in most of our solution development. Now, what I've come to understand is it's always about the final result. Now, if your solution is what the client wants, then you've solved the problem. If the solution is not what the client wants, then you failed. I believe it's binary. It's either 1 or 0. Interesting. Now, to do this, obviously, we have to ask the right questions. Coming to the right solution always involves asking the right questions. Now, so often we tend to be biased. As humans, we tend to be biased based on our history, our past history, our experiences, and so often we tend to ask questions based on that. Now, one technique we tend to do is we try to observe the user. Now, I've always said people will always answer the questions you ask them. They'll never answer the questions you don't ask them. Now, if you don't ask, they won't tell you. So one way we'll obviously try to get this information or from the users is basically try and observe them or basically be the fly on the wall. And through this observation, we usually tend to unearth information. So we'll probably just sit in your office, monitor the task you're doing, and then try see how we can improve that just by monitoring what you're doing. Not by asking you questions, because we may ask you questions based on our bias. So we'd rather see it and just monitor and see what you're doing. And we do get a lot of interesting feedback through this, because it helps us to unearth answer questions which we would have never thought of. Now, another technique we always try and do is try to be in the shoe of the customer, be in their shoes. And this obviously means getting out of the office and just experience it firsthand what the customer experiences. Now, I tend to get a lot of inspiration from traveling around. You get to see how people do things differently, and you try bring those differences and try create solutions which obviously answers or solves the client's problems. My next point is create for the audience in mind. Now, are we creating Africa-centric solutions, or are we just creating solutions? We're often so quick to innovate and develop solutions, forgetting that we're in Africa. Now, the African environment, the African culture, these play a big part of being African, and you need to create for the continent. Now, I can remember last December, I traveled to Livingstone, Zambia for some personal things. Now, while I was there, obviously you can't go to Livingstone, Zambia and not visit Victoria Falls. That would be like taboo. So I went to visit the falls like anyone else would be in there. Now, being a last minute trip, obviously when December COVID was its peak and all borders were closed. Now, just before Christmas, the government decided to open the borders in Botswana, where I currently stay. And I took that opportunity to just jump in the car and cross the border and just go sort out what I wanted to do there. Obviously, I'd been holding off for the last 8 months due to COVID. One of those inconveniences COVID brought. I believe everyone can attest to that. Now, I got there. First of all, found out getting accommodation was very difficult. It just happened to be everyone decided to come into Livingston at that point. Now, the borders were obviously closed, so it wasn't European borders were obviously closed at that time, so it wasn't our tourists from the other continents. It was primarily local tourists. These were Zambians who had gone into Livingston and filled up all the accommodation. Now, managed to get accommodation miraculously, and as I was at the Vigfors, I bumped into one of these guys who sell souvenirs, and I basically chatting with him and asked him, so how is business? Because I can see Livingston is packed. I mean, there's literally no accommodation, so you must be selling your souvenirs must be selling like hotcakes. So he was like, hey, my friend, business is bad. And I was like, wait a minute, the town is full. People are here. What is the problem? Why are you not able to sell to them? So he was like, well, our customers are usually tourists from other continents. This is the first time we've actually had an influx of local tourists, being tourists from within Zambia, and that poses a challenge to them, because to them the customer has changed and they now need to adapt. So they're still selling the same goods. Now I was like, wait a minute, I believe a human-centered design principle can be applied in solving this problem, and it's all about creating for your audience in mind. Now the audience has changed, so you need to adapt. Now, surely this new audience does wear jewelry. Yes or no? Yes. Now, surely this audience do wear clothes, right? You can print something and print the material and sell to them, and you can create jewelry, whether it's earrings or whatever. Now, the point is, they need to now learn and create for this new audience in mind, because they have been so used to creating for the audience that comes from outside the continent that they've forgotten the actual local tourists and creating products for them. And what I believe is, if they're able to create something for this audience, who knows, when the other tourists from the other continents come to Livingston, who knows, they might also like these new products that they'll be developing. And not only are they diversifying their product range, but obviously this results in more revenue for them, because now they're able to cater for both tourists coming from from outside the continent, and also being able to cater for the local, or if I would call it the local African tourists, who usually gets neglected and not thought of. The next point I'd like to discuss is the human-centered design in ICT social development projects. Now, social development projects basically focus on improving the social well-being of individuals in a society, and obviously ICT is a good enabler or a tool that can be used to improve the social well-beings of any society. Now, I would like to start off by posing a question to you. If I were to come to you and tell you I've got 10 schools in my country and they need access, now obviously due to COVID, the government has basically shut down schools. That's the face-to-face schooling, and the students can no longer come to school, but education needs to continue. Now, government is going to shut schools for 8 months, and that's almost a whole year lost. What solution can you provide for me? Okay, let me make it juicy. Let me say 20 schools, and all the financing is there. You don't have to worry about the financing. Just give me a solution. Now, I bet you 9 out of 10 of you will come back to me with a proposal for a mobile app or a website And with all the bells and whistles, the teacher logs in, they can video conference with the students. Students can log in and they can see what the teacher is doing and yada, yada, yada. Now, one thing you forgot to ask was the right question. Where are these 20 schools? Now, they're all in a remote area and even the teachers do not have access to laptops. So if the teachers can't get online, what more the student? Now, this obviously poses a challenge in your, but I believe there's a solution for everything. And the reason why all of you or most of you were thinking of a mobile app, because it's your bias. You're biased based on your past experiences and your history. And the first thing you obviously thought of was, wow, we could set up a mobile app or we could set up a website where they could log in and come and video conference and so forth. But you forgot one key component is you forgot where we need to design for the African context, and you forgot that we're actually in Africa and we need to be mindful of the challenges that we face in Africa, but a solution can still be provided. Now, all we simply need to do is just be mindful of what is there on the continent and try to innovate based on that. It's like saying you've got a village and you're trying to improve financial inclusion. You go put an ATM machine in there and give everyone ATM cards or debit cards. Are you improving financial inclusion? Well, first of all, most of those people in that village will probably be afraid of that ATM. There's what you call technophobia, and people take time to adapt to new technologies. And if you just go put an ATM in the middle of the village and expect everyone to use it, well, you'll be shocked. I've heard instances where books are donated to a remote area, and textbooks, that is. Now, what happens is the teacher just locks them up and puts them in a cupboard, and they're not utilized. And then when you ask, but why are you not utilizing the books? And then the teacher will then simply come and say, well, we don't want to get the pages dirty. Now, you forgot the context, the culture. This is something that we should always be mindful of and always innovate based on the African context. Now, I'd like to touch on human-centered design in hubs. Now, hubs play a key role in creating homegrown innovation and solutions. Now, here too, human-centered design principles can be applied when designing solutions. Now, as I've mentioned, you need to put the people in the middle. When you collaborate with them, you co-create the solution with the people. Now, it's if I were to summarize it, you need to create your solutions with the people and for the people. Just to repeat that again, you need to create solutions with the people for the people. Now, that means the people need to be key, as always. We should not neglect that. Now, I've always said a good solution does not force a user to change, or does not force a user to change to use it. However, the solution changes the user for the better. Let me repeat that again in case you missed it. A good solution does not force a user to change to use it. However, the solution changes the user for the better. Now, I'll give an example. 20 years ago, yeah, that's before your big boom on the internet, communication was primarily via voice call, and that was the fastest way, besides letters, obviously. Now, voice, well, not all of us used to call internationally. Yeah, I admit I'm one of those. Because it was expensive. Yes, that's the right word. It was expensive to call international. So if you had friends or relatives overseas, or even just across the border in other countries, it was seen as an expense to actually communicate with them. So the cost was a challenge, was a barrier to communication. Now, fast forward 20 years, and now we've got your WhatsApp, you've got all these social media, and now you've got your Zooms and so forth. We could literally pick up your phone, which obviously didn't exist back then, and oh yeah, fine. At the beginning of the internet age would Skype, but Skype meant if you don't have a laptop or a computer at home, you had to go to an internet cafe. That was still a challenge, a barrier to communication. Now, come the smartphone and internet boom, and now we can just pick up the phone and be able to reach anyone, anywhere in the world, thanks to all these applications that have been developed for video conferencing or audio communication. Now, what has happened here is the communication space has not forced us to change. However, it has changed us to make us enhance our communication. Now able to communicate quicker, faster, better than anywhere, anytime before. But at the same time, it has not forced us to change. So this is some of the things that we should always be mindful of when we innovate and when we create solutions is try to create solutions that don't force the user to change. But however, the solution changes the user for the better, makes them more efficient, and makes them more productive. And in a nutshell, that is what a human-centered design principle tries to achieve by putting the people at the middle and creating something that works best for the people. In closing, I'd like to touch on the 4 human-centered design principles, which I've touched upon in the last couple of minutes. Now, so the first one basically being solve the core problem, not just the problem as presented to you, which is sometimes the symptom. Customers or users will come and present to you a symptom, but it is up to you now to come up and identify the core problem. And obviously the human-centered design helps us to do that. Now, this helps us solve the actual real problem for the client and not solve the wrong problem, because a solution can either be right or wrong. And you always want to be solving the right problem. Now, be people-centered. You need to consider all the people involved, not just some of the people, but everyone involved. Do not neglect anyone. And always take in account of the people's history, their cultures, their beliefs, and obviously the environment they're in. All these need to be accounted for as you create the solution. Then the third one basically is saying your design must focus on the entire activity under consideration and not just isolated components. Now, usually fixing or improving a small local issue may be seen as beneficial, but local optimization usually does not result in global optimization. It creates suboptimal global results. So you need to consider that there's so many components and you need to be aware of all of them. And obviously feedback, interviews, getting feedback from the people helps you to identify and get a full perspective of what you're considering. And the fourth one basically being you need to prototype, you design, and you basically keep refining your solutions. Your solution may not be right the first time, but by iterating and making adjustments with the people in mind, getting feedback from the people, you end up coming up with a solution which actually works better than the first version that you came up with. So you'll be encouraged to continue iterate and keep getting feedback from the users. I know this sometimes may not be possible due to the way businesses run or the way people are accustomed to doing things. Usually it's start, develop, finish, then go deliver it to the client. But this sometimes what then happens is you create a solution which does not meet what the client wants, and you've spent all your time and created this wonderful solution, like the example I gave of the teaching aid, where most of you are probably thinking of a mobile app or a website, but it just didn't work. So try to get feedback, put the people in the middle, and you just keep iterating with the people so that at the end of the day, you're creating the right solution for the customer and not a solution for you. Because so often we tend to build solutions for us and neglecting that the solution is actually for the customer. And that comes to the end of my talk, and I just want to thank you for giving me your ears and being attentive, and hopefully you've learned something new today. And basically I want to challenge you to use the human-centered design principles in all your innovations. Have a good day. Bye.